What if the most famous suicide in history was a lie? What if the story of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, dying from the bite of a venomous snake wasn't an act of despair, but a final terrifying ritual to become a god? For centuries, we've been told a simple story of a defeated queen choosing death over humiliation. But the truth is infinitely more complex and far more brilliant. Cleopatra wasn't just a ruler. She was a master illusionist, a grand strategist playing a game on a cosmic scale. She built her entire reign on a single audacious idea: that she was not a mortal woman, but the living incarnation of the goddess Isis. And she made the most powerful men in the world believe it. But there was a fatal flaw in her divine plan. A single miscalculation in her grand mythology that would not only cost her an empire, but would erase her entire world from existence. And by the end of this video, you will understand what that fatal flaw was. To understand how a woman could attempt to become a god, you first have to understand the crumbling world she was born into. Imagine living on the edge of a volcano, knowing that at any moment, an unstoppable river of fire could consume everything you love. That was Cleopatra's Egypt, and the volcano was Rome. In the 1st century BC, Rome was the undisputed hyperpower of the ancient world. It was a relentless, ever-expanding empire, a military machine that devoured kingdoms for breakfast. And for 300 years, Cleopatra's family, the Ptolemies, had managed to keep Egypt out of its jaws. They weren't Egyptian, not by a long shot. They were Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. They ruled Egypt like a conquered territory, speaking Greek, worshipping Greek gods, and living in the glittering multicultural metropolis of Alexandria, a city that looked more like Athens than Thebes. For generations, they paid Rome off. They sent grain, gold, and bowed to every demand, surviving as a client state, a puppet kingdom whose strings were pulled from the Roman Senate. Cleopatra's own father, Ptolemy XII, was a living testament to this humiliation. The Romans mockingly called him Auletes, the flute player, a weak, decadent ruler more interested in parties than politics. At one point, his own people got so fed up with his corruption and subservience to Rome that they kicked him off the throne and drove him out of Egypt. And what did he do? He ran crawling to Rome, begging the Senate to restore him to power. Imagine being a young Cleopatra, a sharp, fiercely intelligent princess, watching your father, the king, the supposed god on earth, groveling before foreign politicians. Watching him bankrupt your country to pay the bribes necessary to get his own throne back, propped up only by the goodwill of Roman legions. She learned a brutal lesson very early on. Political power was fragile. Armies could be defeated. Gold could be spent. The only thing Rome truly respected was power, and her family had none left. But Cleopatra was different. While her ancestors had insulated themselves in their Greek world, she looked beyond the palace walls. She did something no Ptolemaic ruler had done in 3 centuries. She learned to speak Egyptian. This wasn't a hobby. It was a strategic masterstroke. She understood that her family's power base, the Greek elite of Alexandria, was fickle. The true, ancient, and enduring power of her kingdom lay with the millions of native Egyptians who worked the fields along the Nile. The people who still worshipped the old gods. Ra Osiris, and the most powerful of them all, the mother of creation, the goddess of magic, Isis. And she didn't stop at Egyptian. She learned to speak the languages of the Ethiopians, the Hebrews, the Arabs, the Syrians, the Medes, the Parthians. She was a linguistic prodigy, a brilliant mind soaking up knowledge in the world's greatest center of learning, the Library of Alexandria. She studied rhetoric, the art of persuasion. She studied philosophy and mathematics. She was forging her mind into a weapon, because she knew the daggers were already being sharpened within her own family. When her father, the flute player, finally died, he left the throne to 10-year-old Cleopatra and her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Following the bizarre and ancient family tradition, they were married. Brother and sister, husband and wife, co-rulers of a kingdom on the brink. But in reality, they were pawns in a shadowy court of ambitious advisors. A cabal of eunuchs and generals saw their chance. They knew they could easily control the young, pliable boy king. But the sharp-witted, fiercely independent Cleopatra? She was a threat. So they began to poison her brother's mind against her. They whispered that she wanted the throne for herself, that she would dispose of him. They systematically stripped her of her authority, turning the court and the army against her. Within a few short years, the Queen of Egypt was a queen in name only. She was hunted, isolated, and finally, forced to flee for her life, escaping into the deserts of Syria. She was in exile. She had nothing. No army, no treasury, no allies. By all accounts, her story should have ended there. Another forgotten Ptolemaic princess swallowed by the sands of history. But in that desolate exile, with everything taken from her, Cleopatra had a revelation. She had been fighting the wrong war. She had been trying to play the game of men, the game of armies and politics that her father had so miserably lost. She realized that her Greek heritage, her Ptolemaic name, was a liability. It marked her as a foreign occupier. But she had an asset none of her ancestors had ever bothered to cultivate: a genuine connection to the soul of Egypt itself. She couldn't outfight her brother's armies. She couldn't outbribe the Roman Senate, so she would go over their heads. She would appeal to a higher authority. The pharaoh of Egypt was never just a king. He or she was the living bridge between the mortal world and the divine, the incarnation of the god Horus. For centuries, her family had treated this sacred duty as a mere formality, a costume to be worn at ceremonies. Cleopatra decided to make it real. She would stop being Cleopatra the Greek princess and become Isis the Egyptian goddess. Not just as a title, but as a living, breathing identity. Isis was everything Cleopatra needed to be. A devoted wife who resurrected her murdered husband Osiris, a fierce mother who protected her son Horus, a master of magic who held the secrets of life and death. She was the ultimate symbol of female power, of order triumphing over chaos. By becoming Isis, Cleopatra would no longer be just a contender for a throne. She would be divine will made manifest. Her fight would become a holy war. To defy her would be to defy the gods themselves. It was the most ambitious rebranding campaign in human history, a desperate gamble born from exile. She would weave a new reality, a myth so powerful it could bend the world to her will. It was a strategy that could defeat armies, charm dictators, and secure her kingdom. But she was missing one crucial element. A myth is just a story until people believe it. And to make the world believe, she needed an audience. Not just any audience. She needed to convince the most powerful, pragmatic, and dangerous man on the planet. At that very moment, that man was sailing towards Egypt, fresh from his victory in the Roman Civil War. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. Cleopatra had her divine identity. She had her plan. Now she just needed to get in a room with the man who held the fate of her world in his hands. And she was about to do it in a way that he and history would never forget. The year is 48 BC. The city of Alexandria is a viper's nest, and Julius Caesar is trapped right in the middle of it. He'd arrived in Egypt chasing his rival, Pompey the Great, only to be presented with Pompey's severed head on a platter, a gruesome welcome gift from the boy king, Ptolemy XIII. Caesar, a master of political theater, reportedly wept. Not out of love for Pompey, but out of fury. This boy, this puppet king, had denied him the glory of pardoning his greatest enemy. More than that, he had murdered a Roman consul. It was an insult that could not be ignored. Caesar, with his small legionary force, barricaded himself inside the royal palace, a city within a city. He was effectively a prisoner, surrounded by Ptolemy's massive army and a hostile Alexandrian mob. He was there to settle the dispute over the Egyptian throne, as dictated by the will of Cleopatra's father. But everyone knew what he was really there for: money. Rome was expensive. Wars were expensive. And Egypt was the wealthiest bank in the world. Ptolemy's advisors, the eunuch Pothinus and the general Achilles, thought they had the Roman cornered. They controlled the army, the city, and the treasury. And they controlled the king. Their plan was simple: keep Caesar busy with negotiations, bleed his resources, and keep the true queen, Cleopatra, exiled and powerless out in the desert. They had her completely locked out of her own capital. Any attempt to enter the city would mean certain death at the hands of her brother's patrols. From their perspective, the game was already won. They had fatally underestimated two people: Julius Caesar and the woman who was a goddess. Cleopatra knew she was playing for her life. A negotiation from a distance was a death sentence. She couldn't send a letter. It would be intercepted. She couldn't send an envoy. They would be killed or turned away. If she was going to win, she had to plead her case in person. She needed to get past an enemy army, through a guarded harbor, into a locked-down palace, and stand face to face with the most powerful man in the world. It was an impossible task. And that's precisely why it was the kind of challenge a goddess would relish. Her plan was so audacious, so utterly insane, that it has become the stuff of legend. With a single, trusted attendant, a Sicilian named Apollodorus, she took a small fishing boat and sailed under the cover of darkness along the treacherous coastline to Alexandria's harbor. They had to slip past Ptolemy's naval patrols, any one of which would have seized them on sight. Imagine the scene. The future of Egypt, the living Isis, huddled in a tiny, rickety boat, the salty spray on her face, the lights of the great Pharos lighthouse her only guide, sailing into the heart of enemy territory. This wasn't just a political maneuver. It was a hero's journey, a descent into the underworld to confront the King of Kings. But getting into the harbor was the easy part. The palace itself was a fortress. The guards were loyal to her brother. So how do you smuggle a queen into a castle? You don't. You smuggle something common, something no one would ever look at twice. The ancient historian Plutarch tells us she laid herself out full length inside a bed sack, not a glamorous Persian carpet, as Hollywood would have you believe, but a rustic, durable bag used for carrying bedding and laundry. It was humble. It was practical. It was genius. Apollodorus, a man of immense strength, slung the sack over his shoulder and simply walked up to the palace gates. He looked like any other servant making a delivery. He navigated the courtyards and corridors, nodding at the Roman guards, a ghost carrying precious cargo that no one even knew existed. He made his way to Caesar's private chambers. He was granted entry. The Roman dictator, likely reviewing maps or dictating letters, would have looked up, annoyed at the interruption. A servant bringing a lumpy bag of bedding. And then Apollodorus untied the rope. He tipped the sack. And out rolled a queen. Stop for a moment and put yourself in Caesar's shoes. You are 52 years old. You have conquered Gaul. You have crossed the Rubicon. You have seen everything the world has to offer. You've met kings, queens, and chieftains. You are a pragmatist, a cynic, a man who bends the world to his will through logic and force. And suddenly a woman appears at your feet, materializing from a laundry bag. She is not a beggar. She is not a captive. She is 21 years old, a whirlwind of energy, intelligence, and breathtaking audacity. Her eyes, we are told, held a fire. Her voice was like a musical instrument, capable of speaking a half-dozen languages fluently. This wasn't just a political entrance. It was a piece of divine theater. It was a birth, like Aphrodite emerging from the sea foam, or Athena springing fully formed from the head of Zeus. Cleopatra presented herself not as a supplicant, but as a revelation. A miracle. She hadn't just bypassed Ptolemy's army, she had bypassed the laws of reality. In that single electrifying moment, she communicated more than any envoy ever could. She was clever. She was fearless. She was unpredictable. She was, in a word, divine. And Caesar, the man who claimed to be a direct descendant of the goddess Venus, understood this language perfectly. He wasn't just looking at a potential ally. He was looking at a kindred spirit. A fellow performer on the world stage. A woman who understood that power wasn't just about armies and gold, but about story, about myth. He was instantly and utterly captivated. They talked long into the night. She didn't just plead for her throne. She dazzled him. She spoke of Egypt's history, its wealth, its strategic importance. She spoke his language, Latin, and her native Greek with equal fluency. She wasn't just asking for his help. She was offering him a partnership with Egypt, a partnership with Isis. She laid out a vision of a world where Rome's military might and Egypt's ancient wealth and culture could unite, led by two people who were more than just mortals. By sunrise, the deal was done. Caesar was enchanted. He had found his queen for Egypt. He promised to enforce their father's will and place her on the throne beside her brother, though everyone in that room knew who would truly be in charge. The next morning, Caesar summoned Ptolemy XIII to the palace. The boy king swaggered in, confident that the Roman was still isolated, still his pawn. He walked into Caesar's audience chamber, expecting to continue his charade, and then he saw her, standing beside Julius Caesar. His sister, the woman he had exiled, the woman he had tried to kill, was there, at the very heart of power, looking at him with an expression of absolute triumph. Ptolemy completely lost his mind. He flew into a rage, screaming that he had been betrayed. He ripped the diadem from his own head and threw it to the floor, running out of the palace and into the streets, shouting to the people of Alexandria that Caesar had chosen his enemy over their king. The boys' tantrum was the spark that lit the fuse. The Alexandrian mob, already suspicious of the Romans, erupted in a riot. Ptolemy's general Achilles saw his chance and marched his 20,000-man army on the palace. Cleopatra's gamble had worked perfectly. She had won over Caesar. She had secured her claim to the throne. But in doing so, she had plunged the greatest city on earth into a brutal, bloody war. Caesar, Cleopatra, and their small band of Romans were now besieged in the palace, surrounded by a furious army and an entire city baying for their blood. She had gotten into the room with the most powerful man in the world. Now they would have to fight their way out of it together. The royal palace of Alexandria, once a symbol of Ptolemaic power, had become a gilded cage. Outside its walls, the city screamed. The cacophony of rage was a physical thing, a wave of sound that crashed against the marble and gold. This wasn't just a protest. It was the sound of a kingdom turning on itself. The army of the boy King Ptolemy, led by the general Achilles, held the city. And inside, trapped with a few thousand of his best legionaries, was Gaius Julius Caesar. And with him, the woman who had gambled everything to be there. For Cleopatra, this was the ultimate test. She had studied the legends of her ancestors, the great conquerors and divine pharaohs. But their stories were written in stone and papyrus. Her story was being written in real time in fire and steel. She was not a queen hiding behind her guards. She was in the heart of the command center, a whirlwind of calculated calm amidst the Roman storm. While Caesar, the master strategist, organized the defense, pointing to maps and barking orders in clipped Latin, Cleopatra provided a different kind of intelligence. She knew the city's pulse. She knew its secret passages, its water supplies, the loyalties of its various factions. She spoke the language of the docks and the temples. She explained to Caesar that the mob outside wasn't just angry about him, a Roman interfering. They were angry because they believed their rightful king, her little brother, was a prisoner. They saw Caesar as a foreign invader and her as a traitorous consort. She had to flip the narrative, and she had to do it from inside a fortress under siege. This is where her true genius ignited. She began to weave a new myth, not for the masses outside, not yet, but for the man standing beside her. She framed their predicament not as a political crisis, but as a divine trial. She was Isis, the goddess who gathered the scattered pieces of her husband Osiris to restore order to the universe. And Caesar? He was no mere mortal general. He was a descendant of Venus, a man touched by the gods, a force of destiny arriving in her sacred land. Their union, she argued, wasn't just convenient. It was fated. This siege wasn't a disaster. It was the crucible required to forge a new world order, an alliance between the might of Rome and the magic of Egypt. Caesar was a pragmatist, a man who believed in logistics and legions. But he was also a Roman, a man who understood the immense, world-shaping power of a good story. He saw in her not just a beautiful and intelligent woman, but a fellow master of propaganda. He saw a reflection of his own ambition, cloaked in the mystique of a 1,000-year-old faith. He was playing for control of the Roman world. She was playing for the soul of Egypt itself. And here, in this besieged palace, their games became one. The fighting was brutal and relentless. Day after day, the legionaries held the line against overwhelming numbers. Caesar, realizing he needed to control the sea lanes to have any hope of reinforcement or escape, made a daring move to seize the city's harbor. He needed to neutralize the Egyptian fleet. And in the chaos of that battle, the unthinkable happened. Fire, used as a weapon to burn the enemy ships, spread uncontrollably. Whipped by the sea breeze, the flames leaped from the docks to the buildings nearby. And soon, a column of black smoke rose over the city, marking a funeral pyre for the collective mind of the ancient world. The great library of Alexandria was burning. From the palace, Cleopatra watched the heart of her civilization turn to ash. This wasn't just a building. It was the repository of generations of Ptolemaic pride. It held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the philosophies of Athens, the mathematics of Pythagoras, the histories of Herodotus, the poetry of Homer, medical texts, astronomical charts, the accumulated knowledge of humanity. It was the symbol of Alexandria as the intellectual capital of the world. And it was gone. In that moment, any lesser ruler would have broken. This was a catastrophe beyond measure. a wound from which her culture might never recover. But as the smoke stung her eyes, Cleopatra's resolve hardened. The past was burning. Very well. She would build the future. She would embody that knowledge. She would become the living library of her people. She turned this devastating loss into a source of grim power. She would not be the queen who lost the library. She would be the queen who rose from its ashes, a phoenix remade in the crucible of her city's grief. The situation grew more desperate. The Egyptian army managed to contaminate the palace's water supply, pumping seawater into the canals and cisterns. Thirst became as great an enemy as the soldiers outside. Caesar's men, hardened veterans of Gaul, were now sick and weakened, digging frantic wells for brackish water. The siege was tightening its grip, strangling them. In another bold gambit, Caesar attempted to capture the Pharos lighthouse, the colossal structure that controlled access to the harbor. The fighting was fierce, a bloody struggle on the narrow causeway connecting it to the mainland. Suddenly, the Roman position was overrun. Caesar himself was forced into the sea to escape. The supreme commander of Rome, the conqueror of Gaul, was just another man, splashing desperately in the Mediterranean. The stories say he swam with one arm, using the other to hold his precious military journals. His famous commentaries, out of the water, determined that even if he died, his story would survive. Other accounts say he held his purple general's cloak in his teeth. Whatever the truth, he barely made it to a Roman ship, waterlogged and humiliated but alive. Cleopatra witnessed this. She saw the man who styled himself a god, the unstoppable force of nature, humbled by the waters of her home. It was a pivotal moment. It stripped away the myth and revealed the man. Determined, brilliant, but utterly mortal. He could bleed. He could drown. And in that shared vulnerability, their alliance deepened into something more. It was no longer just a contract between two rulers. It was a bond forged in shared desperation and mutual respect for the other's will to survive. Winter came and the siege dragged on. For months they held out. Then, finally, on the horizon, came the sight they had been praying for. The sails of a Roman relief force, commanded by one of Caesar's allies, Mithridates of Pergamon. They had landed to the east and were marching on the city. The trap was about to become a pincer. Achilles was forced to split his army, sending a large portion to intercept the arriving Romans. Caesar seized the moment. In a series of brilliant, lightning-fast maneuvers, he broke out of the palace, linked up with his reinforcements, and forced a final decisive confrontation. The Battle of the Nile was not a siege. It was open warfare, Roman legions against the Egyptian phalanx. Cleopatra's brother, the young Ptolemy XIII, was now with the Egyptian army. Panicked by the turn of events, he tried to flee the battlefield by boat across the river. But in the chaos, the boat was swamped and capsized. Weighed down by his golden armor, the boy king of Egypt sank into the muddy depths of the Nile, the very river whose gods he was supposed to embody. His death was the final blow. The Egyptian army shattered. Caesar was victorious. He marched back into Alexandria not as a besieged foreigner, but as an undisputed conqueror. The city that had bayed for his blood now fell silent in submission. And at his side stood Cleopatra. She had not only survived, she had won. She had rolled the dice on a man trapped in her palace, and the gamble had paid off spectacularly. Her brother and rival was dead. Her sister Arsinoe, who had also fought against her, was a captive. The Roman legions controlled the streets. She was now, at 22 years old, the sole uncontested ruler of the richest kingdom on earth. The goddess Isis had not just endured her trial by fire. She had triumphed, emerging with a divine partner at her side, ready to claim her throne and reshape her world. Her first act as the undisputed pharaoh was not one of vengeance or lavish celebration. It was an act of pure governance, an act of a goddess tending to her flock. For Egypt was starving. The Nile, the very lifeblood of the kingdom, the river whose annual flood was the heartbeat of the economy, had failed. For 2 consecutive years, the inundation was weak, leaving the fields parched and the granaries dwindling. This was the ultimate test for a ruler who claimed kinship with the gods. Famine was the great equalizer. It could topple dynasties faster than any Roman legion. Her predecessors, including her own father, would have locked the royal granaries, hoarding the kingdom's wealth for the palace and the army while the people starved in the streets. This was the Ptolemaic way. But Cleopatra was not just a Ptolemy. She was Isis. And Isis was the goddess of life, the giver of abundance, the mother who nurtured her people. So she did something radical, something that sent shockwaves through the Egyptian aristocracy. She ordered the royal granaries opened. She released the state's reserves of grain to the public, ensuring that her people were fed. It was a calculated risk, a massive gamble with the kingdom's resources, but it was also a profound statement. It declared that her power did not come from hoarding wealth, but from providing for her people. In the midst of a natural disaster, she manufactured a miracle. The people didn't just see a queen. They saw their goddess made manifest, battling the forces of chaos and bringing forth order and sustenance, just as the myths foretold. With Egypt stabilized and her people's loyalty secured not by fear but by love, a new call came from the west. Julius Caesar, now the undisputed master of Rome, summoned her. He didn't just invite her. He essentially commanded her presence in the capital of the world. For any other client ruler, this would be an act of submission, a journey to pay homage to their overlord. But for Cleopatra, it was something else entirely. It was a state visit. It was the goddess of the Nile going to meet the living god of the Tiber. She would not go as a supplicant. She would go as an equal. She arrived in Rome in 46 BC, not as a conquered queen, but as a visiting monarch. She didn't stay in the city proper. That would have been a breach of protocol for a foreign ruler. Instead, Caesar housed her, their infant son Caesarion, and her entire magnificent entourage in one of his private villas across the Tiber River, a luxurious estate with sprawling gardens. And from this base, Cleopatra began her conquest of Rome, but not with swords and shields. She used a far more potent weapon, culture. Her court was a dazzling spectacle of Hellenistic and Egyptian splendor, a stark contrast to the austere, martial culture of the Roman Republic. Philosophers, scientists, artists, and astronomers flocked to her villa. The air buzzed with Greek, the language of intellect and art. She held salons where the greatest minds of the day debated the nature of the cosmos. Roman aristocrats who prided themselves on their pragmatism and military prowess were suddenly confronted with a world of ancient wisdom, breathtaking luxury, and intellectual sophistication they could barely comprehend. They were both mesmerized and deeply unsettled. The Romans didn't know what to make of her. They saw a woman of immense charm, a brilliant conversationalist fluent in a half-dozen languages, a political mind as sharp as any senator's. But they also saw something dangerous. They saw a queen. The word itself, rex or king, was poison in Rome, a title they had shed centuries ago when they violently overthrew their monarchy and established the Republic. To them, kingship was synonymous with tyranny, decadence, and oriental despotism. And here was this Egyptian queen, dripping in jewels, surrounded by eunuchs, wielding absolute power in her homeland, and holding their great general Julius Caesar, utterly captivated. They whispered about her. They called her a sorceress, a seductress who had ensnared their hero with exotic potions and magic. It was easier to believe in witchcraft than to accept the terrifying truth that this foreign woman was Caesar's intellectual and political equal. But Caesar didn't care about the whispers. He was preparing his own far louder statement. He was about to show Rome and the world exactly how he saw Cleopatra, and he would do it in the most sacred of spaces. In the heart of the Roman Forum, Caesar had built a magnificent new temple dedicated to Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother. This wasn't just any goddess. For the Julian clan, Venus was their divine ancestor. Caesar claimed direct descent from the goddess of love herself. This temple was the ultimate monument to his family's divine heritage, a cornerstone of his personal mythology. And inside this temple, standing next to the cult statue of his divine ancestress, Caesar did something that shattered every Roman convention. He erected a life-size gilded statue of Queen Cleopatra. Let that sink in. A golden statue of a foreign monarch, a living woman, placed inside the holy sanctuary of a Roman god, to be venerated alongside the goddess herself. This was not just unprecedented, it was sacrilege. It was blasphemy, but it was also a message of breathtaking audacity. And the statue wasn't just of Cleopatra the queen. Caesar had her sculpted in the guise of Isis, the Egyptian goddess. He was publicly, officially, and divinely linking them together. He was placing the Egyptian mother goddess on equal footing with the Roman mother goddess. He was telling the world, my divine ancestor Venus and her divine peer Isis stand together. The The political implications were earth-shattering. This was Caesar's public acknowledgement of their relationship, but it went so much further. By portraying her as Isis, the devoted wife and mother who resurrected her husband Osiris and gave birth to the divine heir Horus, Caesar was crafting a powerful new narrative. He was casting himself as the Roman Osiris, a god-king, and Cleopatra as his divine consort. And their son, the little boy named Caesaron living just across the river? He was Horus, the divine child, destined to inherit his father's power. The statue wasn't just an honor. It was a declaration of dynastic ambition. It was a claim that their child was not just the son of a Roman general and an Egyptian queen, but the offspring of two living deities, heir to both the Roman world and the Egyptian throne. For Cleopatra, this was the ultimate triumph of her mythological strategy. Her identity as the new Isis, which she had so carefully cultivated in Egypt, was now being broadcast from the very heart of the Roman Empire, sponsored by the most powerful man in the world. She had successfully projected her divine aura across the Mediterranean. She wasn't just Caesar's mistress anymore. She was his divine partner. But for the Roman Senate, this was the final straw. They had watched with growing horror as Caesar consolidated power, accepted honors befitting a king, and flirted with the idea of a crown. They saw the golden statue of his foreign queen not as a symbol of love, but as a terrifying omen. It was proof that Caesar no longer considered himself a Roman citizen, a first among equals. He saw himself as a god-king, in the style of the Eastern monarchs they so despised. And they saw Cleopatra as the serpent who had whispered these poisons into his ear. She was the embodiment of everything they feared: monarchy, absolute power, and foreign corruption. She was the living symbol of the death of their republic. In the shadowy halls of the Senate, a conspiracy began to form. Men who had once called Caesar a friend now sharpened their daggers. They believed they were not just killing a man, but saving a civilization from a tyrant and his foreign goddess. Cleopatra, basking in the golden light of her statue, had no idea that the divine mythology she and Caesar had built was about to come crashing down in a bloody spectacle on the floor of the Roman Senate. Her divine partner was marked for death, and her entire world was about to be thrown into chaos once more. The news, when it came, was not a quiet whisper or a coded message. It was a shockwave of raw panic that tore through the city of Rome. It was the sound of running feet, of shouting senators, of a republic suddenly and violently unmoored from its anchor. For Cleopatra, residing in Caesar's lavish villa across the Tiber, the chaos was a death knell for the world she had so carefully constructed. Her divine partner, the man who was meant to co-rule the world with her, the father of her son, had been butchered. Not on a battlefield, but on the stone floor of a government building, stabbed 23 times by men he called his friends. Imagine the sheer vertigo of that moment. The entire foundation of her power in Rome was not just cracked, it was vaporized. She was no longer the honored guest of the all-powerful dictator. She was the foreign queen, the Egyptian sorceress, the living symbol of everything the assassins claimed to be fighting against. Her very presence, and that of her son Caesarion, was a walking, breathing accusation of Caesar's monarchical ambitions. They were loose ends, dangerous loose ends. The assassins, men like Brutus and Cassius, called themselves the liberators. But their liberation was built on Caesar's blood, and Cleopatra knew, with the cold certainty of a monarch who understood survival, that they would not hesitate to spill more to secure their new reality. Her divine status as Isis, which had been a source of awe and power, was now a liability. In the eyes of these new men, she wasn't a goddess. She was an oriental monarch, a corrupting influence, the ultimate proof of Caesar's tyranny. The statues of her in the Temple of Venus Genitrix were no longer a sign of honor. They were a target. Her son Ptolemy Caesar was not the child of a god. He was the potential rival, the boy who could one day rally Caesar's legions and claim his inheritance. They had to get out, not with the pomp and circumstance of a royal departure, but like thieves in the night. The journey from Rome back to the shores of Alexandria was a desperate, hurried flight, a retreat from a city that had promised a world and delivered only a grave. Back in the familiar splendor of her own capital, the true challenge began. The political chaos in Rome was one thing, but for Cleopatra, the crisis was fundamentally theological. Her entire persona was built on a divine narrative. She was Isis, and she had found her Osiris in Julius Caesar. Together, they were meant to bring order to the world. But Osiris hadn't been defeated by a rival god in some epic cosmic battle. He had been killed by a pack of mortal men with daggers. How does a goddess explain that? How does she maintain an aura of divine power when her divine consort has proven so mortal? This was the genius of Cleopatra. She didn't try to hide the disaster. She reframed it. She leaned into the mythology. In the Egyptian tradition, the god Osiris was also murdered. He was tricked and killed by his jealous brother Set. His death was not a sign of weakness, but a tragic, necessary prelude to his resurrection and ascension to become king of the afterlife. Caesar's assassination, she could argue, was the same. He hadn't just died. He had been sacrificed. He was a martyr, betrayed by lesser men. His brutal end wasn't a failure. It was a transfiguration. And then, as if the heavens themselves decided to co-sign her new narrative, a miracle appeared. In the summer of 44 BC, during the funeral games held in Caesar's honor, a brilliant comet blazed across the Roman sky for 7 straight days. It was visible in daylight, a stunning, undeniable celestial event. For the superstitious Roman populace, the meaning was clear. It was the soul of Julius Caesar, ascending to the heavens to take his place among the gods. Caesar's ambitious young heir, his grandnephew Octavian, seized on this immediately, minting coins depicting the deified Julius and building a temple to the new god. But no one understood the power of this sign better than Cleopatra. From her palace in Alexandria, she watched the political winds in Rome and saw her opportunity. The Romans had just officially deified her dead lover. They had made him Divus Iulius, the divine Julius. This was a gift from the cosmos. It retroactively validated everything she had built. If Caesar was now officially a god, then what did that make her? She was the chosen partner of a god, the lover of a god. And most importantly, what did it make her son, Caesaran? It made him the son of a god, not just in the vague, metaphorical sense of Egyptian pharaohs, but in a way the Romans, with their new state-sanctioned cult, had to acknowledge. She was no longer just the queen of Egypt. She was the divine widow and the sacred mother. Her personal mythology had just received a massive, undeniable upgrade, written in fire across the night sky. While she consolidated this new divine narrative, the mortal world presented a more immediate test. The Nile, the very source of Egypt's life and the symbol of Isis's bounty, failed. For 2 consecutive years, the river did not rise enough to flood the plains and fertilize the soil. The result was catastrophic. Crops withered, famine spread, and the people began to starve. For any ruler, this is a disaster. But for a ruler who claims to be the living embodiment of the goddess of fertility and abundance, it is a theological crisis. It is a direct challenge to your very identity. Your people are starving, and you are the goddess who is supposed to make the crops grow. What do? This is where Cleopatra proved she was more than just a brilliant propagandist. She was a masterful ruler. Instead of hiding in her palace or making empty sacrifices, she acted. She ordered the vast royal granaries, which had been filled during years of plenty, to be opened. She organized a massive state-run relief effort, distributing grain to the hungry populace and bypassing the corrupt local officials who might have hoarded it. She was seen, she was present, she was in command. In doing this, she didn't just solve a logistical problem. She performed a miracle in keeping with her divine role. When the gods failed to provide, Isis herself stepped in. She became the literal savior of her people. The act of effective, compassionate governance became her most powerful piece of religious theater. She proved her divinity not with symbols but with bread. Meanwhile, the Roman world continued to tear itself apart. The assassins, Brutus and Cassius, had been defeated. A new power block had emerged from the ashes of the Republic, the Second Triumvirate. 3 men now shared the rule of the Roman world. Caesar's chilly and calculating heir, Octavian, the aging statesman, Lepidus, and the man who was everything Octavian was not, the boisterous, hard-living, brilliant, and battle-hardened general Mark Antony. Antony was Caesar's most loyal commander, a man of legendary appetites for wine, women, and warfare. And as the triumvirs carved up the world, Antony took the richest prize, the East. He became the master of Greece, of Asia Minor, and of the client kingdoms on the fringe, including Egypt. He was a man who saw himself in heroic terms. The Romans often compared him to Hercules for his strength and appetites. But in the Greek East, he began to cultivate a different persona, one that would have been deeply familiar to Cleopatra. He began to style himself as the new Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and divine revelry, the Greek equivalent of the Egyptian god, Osiris. From his new headquarters in Tarsus in modern-day Turkey, Antony began to put his new domain in order. He needed money, vast sums of it, to pay his legions and fund his ambitions. And he knew exactly where the most money was: Egypt. He also had questions. During the recent civil war, Cleopatra had played a careful game, offering limited support to the triumvirs. Antony wanted to know where her true loyalties lay, so he sent a message, a summons. The Queen of Egypt was to present herself in Tarsus and answer for her actions. For another ruler, this would have been a moment of fear. It was a demand from her new Roman overlord. But for Cleopatra, it was an invitation. It was an audition. The stage was being set for a new divine drama. The most powerful man in the East, a man styling himself as the new Dionysus, had just summoned the living Isis. She would not go to him as a supplicant. She would not go as a client queen begging for favor. She would go as a goddess, arriving to meet her divine counterpart. The world had taken her first Osiris. Now she was about to see if she could claim another. Mark Antony waited in the city of Tarsus. He was, at this moment, the most powerful man in the eastern half of the Roman world. He had armies, he had legions, he had the loyalty of the men who had fought alongside Caesar. And he needed money, a lot of it. He planned a grand, glorious war against Parthia, Rome's great eastern rival, to avenge the humiliating defeat of his predecessor Crassus. And wars are expensive. So, from his headquarters in Tarsus, a bustling city in modern-day Turkey, he sent out summons to the client kings and queens of the East. They were to come, present themselves, reaffirm their loyalty, and most importantly, open their treasuries. One name on that list was more important than all the others: Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Antony knew the stories. He knew she had been Caesar's lover. He knew she had a son who was supposedly Caesar's. He also knew she had, perhaps reluctantly, sent some aid to his enemies, Brutus and Cassius, before their ultimate defeat. This was his official reason for the summons, to answer for her actions. But the real reason was money. Egypt was the richest land in the Mediterranean. A breadbasket of endless grain and a treasury of unimaginable gold. Antony needed that wealth. He summoned her, expecting a nervous monarch to scurry into his presence, prostrate herself, and offer him anything he wanted to secure her throne. He was a Roman general. She was a foreign queen. That was the order of things. He sent his man, Quintus Dellius, to Alexandria with the summons. Dellius was a smooth talker, and he told Cleopatra of Antony's charm, his love for life, his appreciation for beauty and grand spectacle. He likely told her that such a man would be easily won over by her famous wit and charisma. He thought he was preparing her for the meeting. In reality, he was giving her the exact intelligence she needed. He was handing her the psychological blueprint of the man she needed to conquer. Cleopatra received the summons, and she made Antony wait. Days turned into weeks. In Tarsus, Antony grew impatient, then irritated. The other local rulers had all come and gone, bowing and scraping. But the Queen of Egypt was taking her sweet time. It was a calculated insult, a power play from 1,000 miles away. It made her arrival an event. The entire city was buzzing. Who was this woman who dared to make the great Mark Antony wait? The delay built the legend before she even appeared. When she finally decided the time was right, she didn't travel overland. She sailed up the river Cydnus, and her arrival was not a political visit. It was a divine epiphany. It was the single greatest piece of political theater ever produced. Imagine the scene. Antony is sitting in the public square, the agora, seated on a high tribunal, ready to pass judgment. He has assembled his staff. He is dressed as a Roman magistrate, a man of power and law, ready to receive a subordinate. He is the center of attention, or so he thinks. Then, a rumor spreads through the crowd like fire. A scent on the wind, exotic perfumes and incense, reaching the city long before the source is visible. Then a sound, the ethereal music of flutes and lyres and pipes, drifting over the water. The people of Tarsus, curious and then mesmerized, begin to leave the agora. They turn their backs on the Roman general and his tribunal and flock to the banks of the river to see what's coming. Antony is left sitting there, almost alone, the crowd having abandoned him. His stage has been deserted. His authority in an instant has evaporated. He has been upstaged, humiliated. He has no choice but to get up and follow the crowd to see what has stolen his audience. And what he sees is something torn from the pages of myth. It's a barge, but that word is an insult to the reality. The stern is covered in gold, blazing in the afternoon sun. The massive sails are a deep Tyrian purple, the color of emperors and gods, a color so expensive it was literally worth its weight in silver. The oars themselves are silver, beating the water in time to the unearthly music. And on the deck, under a canopy woven from gold thread, lies Cleopatra. But she is not dressed as a queen. She is dressed as Venus, the Roman goddess of love. Or, for the Greek-speaking people of Tarsus, Aphrodite. She is the living incarnation of the goddess, born from the sea foam. Fanning her are young boys dressed as winged cupids. Her handmaidens, renowned for their beauty, are dressed as sea nymphs and the three graces, steering the rudder and handling the ropes. The entire vessel seems to float on a cloud of its own perfume. The smoke from the incense burners on deck deliberately designed to overwhelm the senses of the entire city. This wasn't an arrival, it was an invasion of the senses. It was a statement. You summoned a queen, but a goddess has answered. She had taken the Greek myth of Aphrodite and the Roman myth of Venus and made it real. And she knew exactly who her audience was. Mark Antony loved grand gestures. He was a man of huge appetites, for food, for wine, for women, for glory. He even styled himself as the new Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, ecstasy, and theater. He saw himself as a living god on earth. So when the goddess of love, Aphrodite, arrived in a spectacle of divine proportions, it wasn't an insult to him. It was an invitation. She was speaking his language. She was acknowledging his own divine pretensions. The word spread instantly through the city. Aphrodite has come to feast with Dionysus for the good of Asia. She had completely flipped the script. He had summoned her to his tribunal to answer for her crimes. Instead, she had summoned the entire city to the riverbank to witness her divinity. And now she sent a message. The goddess Venus invited the god Dionysus to a banquet. On her ship. What could he do? Refuse? He would look like a petty, powerless fool. He accepted. That night, Antony and his senior officers boarded her magical barge. If the arrival was a feast for the eyes, the banquet was an assault on every other sense. The lighting, the music, the endless courses of indescribable food, the wine flowing from jewel-encrusted goblets. It was a level of opulence and sophistication that made the famously hard-living Roman generals look like crude barbarians. Cleopatra was in her element. She wasn't just beautiful, she was brilliant. She could speak a half-dozen languages fluently, so she could charm Antony in his native Latin, and then turn and debate philosophy with a Greek scholar in his entourage. She was witty, she was intelligent, she was utterly captivating. She wasn't just playing the part of a goddess. She was demonstrating that she had the intellect and grace to back it up. Antony, the man who saw himself as a god, was completely and utterly mesmerized. He had expected to meet a client queen begging for her kingdom. Instead, he found himself dining with a goddess who seemed to rule the world with effortless grace. He came to judge, but he stayed to worship. The next night, he tried to host a banquet for her in return, but his attempt was clumsy and provincial compared to hers. He admitted it freely, charmed by his own failure. He had been outmatched in every way, in power, in spectacle, and in wit. This was not a seduction in the simple sense of the word. It was a strategic, mythological rebranding of their entire relationship. By arriving as Venus Aphrodite, she wasn't just making herself his equal. She was casting him in a role. He was Dionysus, or for the Egyptians, he was the new Osiris, the consort god to her Isis. She had lost her first Osiris, Julius Caesar, to the daggers of Rome. Now, looking at this powerful, vibrant, larger-than-life Roman, she had found another. She had used mythology not just to save her throne, but to forge an alliance. She offered Antony a partnership not just of two rulers, but of two living deities, destined to rule the East together. And Antony, a man who already believed in his own legend, was more than willing to believe in hers. The game she was playing was infinitely more complex than a simple political negotiation. She was weaving a new reality, a shared myth powerful enough to bind the master of Rome's legions to her will. And in doing so, she was setting the stage for a conflict that would consume the entire Roman world. And for Mark Antony, a man who modeled himself on Hercules and Dionysus, this was more than a spectacle. It was a homecoming. He wasn't just meeting a queen, he was meeting his divine counterpart. The entire encounter was a masterclass in psychological warfare fought on the battlefield of myth. She hadn't come to him as a supplicant. She had summoned him into her world on her terms, and framed their meeting not as a negotiation between a Roman general and a client queen, but as a cosmic event, a reunion of gods. Antony, a man of legendary appetites and ego, was completely and utterly captivated. He saw in her not just a woman of intoxicating beauty and intelligence, but the living embodiment of the divine feminine power he craved. He saw his own reflection magnified and perfected. He followed her back to Alexandria, and this is a critical turning point. A Roman triumvir, one of the three most powerful men in the world, effectively abandoned his post. He set aside the urgent, grinding work of reorganizing the eastern provinces, of managing legions, of placating governors. Instead, he sailed into the embrace of the Nile, into Cleopatra's capital, and into the heart of her mythological power. The winter of 41 to 40 BC was not spent in a military camp or a Roman administrative center. It was spent in a dream. In Alexandria, the divine theater that began in Tarsus became their lived reality. Together, they founded a private society, an exclusive club known as the Amamatobian, or the Inimitable Livers. On the surface, it was a circle dedicated to hedonism on an epic scale. They feasted, they drank, they held elaborate contests and played outrageous pranks on the citizens of Alexandria, wandering the city streets in disguise at night. The stories of their extravagance became legendary. Tales of dissolving priceless pearls in vinegar just to win a bet, of banquets where the floors were carpeted in rose petals knee-deep. But to dismiss the Inimitable Livers as just a non-stop party is to miss the point entirely. It was a calculated political and cultural act. This was the court of Dionysus and Isis. Every banquet was a ritual. Every night of revelry was a reinforcement of their shared divine status. By creating this exclusive circle, they were building a new kind of court, one that revolved not around Roman austerity or military discipline, but around a Hellenistic ideal of divine monarchy. Their followers weren't just allies, they were initiates in a cult of personality, bound to them by shared secrets and sacred pleasures. It was a bubble of myth, a self-contained universe where they were the twin gods at the center, and the grim realities of Rome felt a world away. While Antony was living as a god in Egypt, a very different narrative was being spun back in Rome. And the spin master was the young, calculating, and dangerously patient Gaius Octavian. Unlike Antony, Octavian understood that the most important battlefield was the mind of the Roman people. He was everything Antony was not: cold, austere, and relentlessly focused on tradition. He began to paint a picture for the Senate and the people of Rome. It was a story of a great Roman hero, Antony, who had fallen under the spell of a foreign sorceress, the barbarian queen, the harlot of the Nile. Octavian's propaganda was insidious and brilliant. He didn't just attack Antony's character, he attacked the very foundation of the myth Cleopatra was building. He took the imagery of Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and foreign mysteries, and twisted it. In his telling, Antony wasn't a god. He was a drunk, a debauched Roman who had forgotten his duty, gone native, and surrendered his Roman masculinity to an Eastern enchantress. He portrayed Alexandria not as a sophisticated center of Hellenistic culture, but as a sinkhole of corruption and decadence, a place that rotted Roman virtue. Every story of the inimitable livers that trickled back to Rome was weaponized by Octavian. The lavish feasts? Proof of Antony's squandering of Roman resources. The divine posturing? Blasphemy against the gods of Rome. Cleopatra herself was cast as the ultimate villain, a cunning manipulator using sex and magic to enslave a Roman leader, with the ultimate goal of subjugating Rome itself under her foreign heel. He was tapping into a deep-seated Roman xenophobia, their fear and suspicion of the powerful, ancient kingdoms of the East. He was crafting a countermyth, a story of Roman honor versus foreign corruption, of West versus East, of order versus chaos. And he, Octavian, was the champion of Rome. This war of narratives had devastating real-world consequences. While Antony was lost in his Alexandrian fantasy, his power base in Italy was crumbling. His own wife, the formidable Fulvia, and his brother Lucius Antonius, saw Octavian consolidating power and decided to act. Desperate to remind Antony of his duties and rally support for his cause, they launched a disastrous war against Octavian in Italy, the Perusine War. They fought in Antony's name, but without his leadership or his legions, they were doomed. Octavian crushed the rebellion, starved Lucius into surrender, and solidified his control over the Italian peninsula. The news of this disaster finally pierced the magical bubble in Alexandria. The real world, in all its brutal political ugliness, had come crashing in. Antony was shaken from his divine revelry. His wife had started a war for him, his brother had been defeated, his veterans were being settled on lands controlled by his rival, and his reputation in Rome was in tatters. The myth of Dionysus was no match for the reality of Roman legions on the march. He was forced to confront a terrible choice: remain in his self-made paradise with his goddess queen, or return to the viper's nest of Roman politics to salvage his power and his future. The dream was over. In the spring of 40 BC, Antony sailed from Alexandria, leaving Cleopatra behind. He left the world of myth and re-entered the world of men. And to prove his commitment to Rome, to mend the fractured triumvirate, he did the unthinkable. He met with Octavian, and to seal their new, uneasy peace, he agreed to a political marriage. He married the one person who represented everything Cleopatra was not: a model of Roman virtue, a symbol of tradition and duty. He married Octavian's own sister, the noble and respected Octavia. For Cleopatra, hearing this news in Alexandria, it must have felt like the ultimate betrayal. The god Dionysus hadn't just left the side of Isis. He had publicly bound himself to the house of her greatest enemy, shattering the divine narrative they had so carefully constructed and setting the stage for a rivalry that would now become deeply, irrevocably personal. For Cleopatra, this was more than a betrayal. It was sacrilege. Her divine partner, her Dionysus, had not just abandoned her for a political marriage. He had knelt at the altar of her rival. Because Octavia wasn't just any woman. She was the sister of Octavian, the man who was meticulously crafting his own divine image around Apollo, the god of light, order, and Roman tradition. Apollo was the antithesis of the wild, ecstatic, foreign Dionysus, and Isis, the universal mother, was now pitted against the ideal of the Roman matron, personified by Octavia. The battle lines were no longer just drawn on a map of the world. They were now drawn across the heavens. A lesser ruler might have panicked, might have seen this as the end. But Cleopatra was not a lesser ruler. She was the incarnation of a goddess whose own mythology was one of loss, patience, and eventual triumph. The god Osiris, Isis's husband, had been torn to pieces, and she had painstakingly traveled the world to put him back together. Cleopatra understood that this was her time to gather the pieces. While Antony was in Rome, playing the part of the dutiful husband, Cleopatra was consolidating her power. She wasn't just waiting, she was building. She secured the kingdom, managed the Egyptian economy with breathtaking skill, and further cemented her divine status among her people. Coins were minted showing her as Isis, nursing her son Horus, or in this case, Caesarion. In every temple, in every public decree, the message was reinforced. The goddess was here, she was patient, and her power was growing. Meanwhile, in Rome, Octavian launched one of the most effective and vicious propaganda campaigns in history. He didn't need armies to attack Cleopatra, not yet. He used words, poems, and rumors as his weapons. He painted a picture for the Roman people of a decadent, morally bankrupt East. He described Antony not as a respected general, but as a man bewitched, a Roman who had gone native, abandoning his heritage for foreign luxuries and a depraved queen. And at the center of this web of corruption was Cleopatra. In Octavian's telling, she was not the living Isis. She was a sorceress, a drunkard, a foreign seductress who used dark magic and her own body to enslave one of Rome's greatest sons. The poet Horace would later write of her as a fatal monster, leading a contaminated flock of followers. Virgil would depict the coming battle as a contest between the monstrous, barking gods of Egypt and the noble, serene gods of Rome, Apollo, Venus, and Minerva. This was a war of culture, a war of identity. Octavian was telling the Roman people, "This is a fight for our soul. Are we the disciplined, orderly, God-fearing people of Apollo? Or are we to become slaves to the chaotic, emotional, foreign mysticism of Dionysus and Isis?" He made Cleopatra the symbol of everything Rome feared about the outside world. She was the other, the great threat. For 4 years this cold war of gods and words raged. Antony, trapped in his loveless political marriage, grew restless. The pull of Alexandria, of the wealth, the power, and the woman who ruled it all was too strong. He needed her resources, her navy, her strategic mind for his planned invasion of Parthia, Rome's great eastern rival. And so he returned. He left the quiet dignity of Octavia and the rigid order of Rome and sailed back to the vibrant, chaotic, intoxicating world of his Isis. His return was not just a personal choice. It was a public declaration. He was choosing the East over the West. He was choosing Dionysus over Apollo. And for Cleopatra, the moment had arrived. Her patience had been rewarded. Her divine partner had been restored to her side. Now it was time to show the world the true power of their union. And she chose to do so in the most dramatic, most audacious, and most provocative way imaginable. The event would be known as the Donations of Alexandria. Imagine a massive public ceremony in the heart of the city. At the center of a gymnasium, on a massive silver platform, sit 2 golden thrones. On one is Mark Antony. On the other, dressed in the sacred robes of Isis, is Cleopatra. Below them on smaller thrones sit their children, including Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar. Antony stands and delivers a speech that sends a shockwave across the entire Mediterranean. He proclaims Cleopatra Queen of Kings and Caesarion King of Kings. He declares Caesarion to be the true, legitimate son and heir of Julius Caesar, a direct public refutation of Octavian's entire claim to power, which was based on being Caesar's adopted son. But he didn't stop there. He then proceeded to carve up the entire eastern half of the Roman sphere of influence and hand it out to his children with Cleopatra. One son was named King of Armenia and Parthia, a kingdom Rome had yet to even conquer. His other son was made ruler of Phoenicia and Syria, and his daughter, Cleopatra Selene, was given Libya. This wasn't just a political announcement. This was a religious coronation. It was Dionysus and Isis creating a new divine dynasty, a new world order with Alexandria, not Rome, at its center. It was the ultimate act of mythological theater, a declaration that the future belonged not to the austere gods of the Roman Republic, but to the ancient, powerful deities of the East. When news of the donations reached Rome, it was the final straw. Octavian had the weapon he needed. This wasn't just Antony giving away titles. This was a Roman general on foreign soil, giving away Roman territory at the behest of a foreign queen. It was treason. To prove it, Octavian committed an act of profound sacrilege. He marched his men to the Temple of Vesta, the Sacred Heart of Rome, and illegally seized Antony's secret will, which was entrusted to the Vestal Virgins. Breaking into the temple was a capital offense, but Octavian knew the contents of that will were worth the risk. He read it aloud to the horrified Senate. Whether the will was real or a brilliant forgery, we'll never know for sure, but its contents confirmed every fear Octavian had so carefully planted. Antony requested to be buried not in Rome, but in Alexandria, beside Cleopatra. He confirmed the vast inheritance he had left to his children by her. He legitimized Caesarion. In the eyes of the Senate and the people, this was the ultimate betrayal. Antony was no longer a Roman. He was hers. Now Octavian could finally make his move. But he did it with a masterstroke of political genius. He knew a civil war against the popular Mark Antony would be divisive and bloody, so he didn't declare war on Antony. He convinced the Senate to declare war on Cleopatra. This wasn't a Roman fighting a Roman. This was Rome united fighting a foreign enemy. This was the noble Apollo leading the forces of order against the dark, chaotic magic of Isis. The propaganda had done its work. The war of mythology was about to become a war of ships, soldiers, and blood. The stage was set for a final cataclysmic confrontation that would decide not just the fate of 2 people, but the fate of the entire known world. The Ionian Sea, on the 2nd day of September 31 BC, was not merely a body of water. It was an arena, a final proving ground where 2 worlds, 2 futures, and 2 pantheons of gods would collide with the force of a tidal wave. On one side, you had Octavian's fleet. Smaller, leaner, more agile ships, commanded by the strategic genius Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. These were not ships built for spectacle. They were built for one purpose: to kill. They represented the very essence of Octavian's propaganda. Disciplined, practical, efficient, Roman. They fought under the watchful eye of Apollo, the god of order, reason, and prophecy, the god Octavian claimed as his divine patron. On the other side was the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. It was a sight to behold, a floating city of gold and purple. Their ships were colossal, some with 10 banks of oars, towering over the waves like leviathans. They were floating fortresses, bristling with catapults and manned by thousands of soldiers. This fleet was the physical embodiment of their divine brand. Immense, opulent, overwhelming, a testament to the inexhaustible wealth of the East. Leading them was Cleopatra's flagship, the Antonius, a vessel of legendary size and luxury. This was the navy of Dionysus and Isis, a force meant to awe and intimidate, to crush opposition through sheer magnificent weight. But that magnificence was also a weakness. These giant ships were slow, difficult to maneuver. They were like heavyweight boxers facing a swarm of nimble street fighters. Agrippa knew this. His plan wasn't to meet them head-on, not to engage in a traditional battle of ramming and boarding. His plan was to dance. His lighter, faster Liburnian ships darted in and out, harassing the larger vessels, using grappling hooks to pull them off course, launching flaming arrows and pots of burning pitch onto their decks. They were hornets stinging a bull, avoiding the horns and going for the vulnerable spots. The battle raged for hours under the hot Greek sun. The sea churned with blood, oil, and splintered wood. The air was thick with the screams of men and the clash of steel. For Antony's forces, it was a frustrating, grinding affair. They couldn't bring their superior numbers and heavier weaponry to bear effectively. For every one of Agrippa's ships they managed to sink, 2 more seemed to appear, peppering them with projectiles, turning their grand vessels into floating funeral pyres. Antony, the legendary Roman general, fought with the heart of a lion from his flagship. He was in his element, a warrior god commanding his legions. But he wasn't just a Roman general anymore. He was the consort of Isis. And Isis was there on her own magnificent flagship, a golden beacon in the heart of the chaos. Her presence was supposed to be a source of divine inspiration, a guarantee of victory, the goddess of magic and thrones, watching over her champion. But as the hours wore on, the tide of battle, both literally and figuratively, began to turn against them. Agrippa's relentless tactics were working. He had successfully outmaneuvered Antony's fleet, trapping them in the Bay of Actium. Their size had become their prison. The Roman hornets were winning. The disciplined order of Apollo was slowly, methodically, dismantling the chaotic grandeur of Dionysus. And then it happened, the moment that would be debated by historians for 2,000 years. A squadron of 60 Egyptian ships, including Cleopatra's flagship, suddenly hoisted their sails they were ordered to bring specifically for this purpose, and broke away from the main battle. They caught a favorable wind and sailed south, away from the fight. They were retreating, fleeing. The sight must have been utterly demoralizing for the men still fighting. Their queen, their goddess, was abandoning them. But what happened next was even more shocking. Mark Antony, seeing Cleopatra's sail disappearing over the horizon, seemed to lose his nerve, his command, his very identity. He abandoned his flagship, transferred to a smaller, faster vessel, and gave the order to follow her. He left his men, his fleet, his honor, and his last chance at ruling the world to burn in the Bay of Actium. Why? For centuries, Roman propagandists and the historians who followed them painted a simple picture. Cleopatra, the cowardly foreign seductress, lost her nerve and fled. And Antony, so bewitched and enslaved by his passion for her, mindlessly followed, a pathetic dog chasing its master. It was the perfect ending to the story Octavian had been telling for years. It proved everything he said was true. Antony was no longer Roman. He was a puppet of the Egyptian queen. But there is another way to look at this, a way that is deeply intertwined with the mythological identity Cleopatra had so carefully constructed. She wasn't just a queen. She was the living goddess Isis. Her divine power, her very essence, was tied to the land of Egypt. Egypt was her temple, the source of her magic. A captured goddess is no goddess at all. For Isis to be captured by the forces of Apollo on foreign soil would be the ultimate theological defeat. It would shatter the myth completely. So, from this perspective, her flight wasn't an act of cowardice. It was a strategic spiritual retreat. The goddess was withdrawing to her sacred territory, to the source of her power, to regroup and fight another day. And Antony? He wasn't just a Roman general. He had publicly declared himself the living god Dionysus, the consort of Isis. When his goddess wife retreated, his divine duty was to follow her. In that critical moment he had to make a choice. Was he Mark Antony, the Roman commander responsible for 300,000 men? Or was he Dionysus, the divine partner of Isis? He chose Dionysus. He chose the myth. He abandoned his soldiers to follow his goddess. It was a decision driven not by military strategy, but by the logic of the divine reality they had built for themselves. The myth that had been their greatest political tool had now become their inescapable destiny. For the men he left behind, the distinction was meaningless. Their commander had deserted them. Their cause was lost. Leaderless and surrounded, Antony's fleet and the legions waiting on the shore surrendered in droves. Over 300 ships were captured or destroyed. It was a total catastrophic victory for Octavian. The war of mythology had been decided by a very real battle, and the gods of Rome had triumphed. As Antony and Cleopatra sailed south, their magnificent dream of an Eastern Roman Empire died in the smoke-filled waters behind them. They had escaped with their lives and a fraction of their fleet, but they were no longer conquerors. They were fugitives. The news of their flight would travel faster than their ships, poisoning their reputation and eroding what little support they had left. Octavian was now the undisputed master of the Roman world. He had won the war of propaganda, and now he had won the war of ships. All that remained was to hunt down the defeated gods and extinguish their light for good. The final act of this epic tragedy was not set for Rome or Greece, but for Alexandria, the glittering capital of Isis, where a goddess and her consort would have to face the mortal consequences of their divine ambition. The legions of Octavian were not an army of gods or heroes from some epic poem. They were a force of pure, calculated Roman pragmatism, a wave of iron and discipline crashing against the shores of a world built on myth. As they closed in on Alexandria, the divine theater that Cleopatra and Antony had so carefully constructed began to crumble, its gilded facade cracking under the relentless pressure of reality. For Antony, the new Dionysus, the end came not with a bang, but with a series of humiliating whimpers. He tried to rally his men, tried to invoke the old magic, the charisma that had once made legions follow him across the world. But the spell was broken. His cavalry deserted. His infantry laid down their arms. His fleet, the very symbol of his eastern power, sailed out of the harbor and surrendered to Octavian without a single arrow being fired. The god of wine and revelry was left hungover and alone, his divine mask falling away to reveal a broken, middle-aged man facing the consequences of a life lived for the moment. The final, cruelest blow came in the form of a rumor, a whisper carried on the wind that Cleopatra, his Isis, was dead. Believing all was lost, he resolved to follow her into the afterlife. But even his death was a tragic parody of a noble Roman end. He fell on his sword, but the wound was not immediately fatal. He lay bleeding in agony, a failed suicide, only to learn that his queen was in fact still alive. His loyal guards carried his dying body to her, and he was hoisted up the walls of her mausoleum, the grand tomb she had built for herself. He died in her arms, not as a god returning to the heavens, but as a mortal man, his blood staining the floor of a monument to an immortality he would never achieve. With Antony gone, Cleopatra was alone. The new Isis was now a queen without a kingdom, a goddess without a consort, a mother of four trapped in a stone tomb with the most powerful man in the world waiting outside. She was not just a prisoner, she was the ultimate prize. Octavian didn't necessarily want her dead. He wanted her alive. He dreamed of the ultimate propaganda victory, parading the legendary Queen of Egypt, the seductress of Caesar and Antony, through the streets of Rome in golden chains as the centerpiece of his triumph. This, for Cleopatra, was a fate infinitely worse than death. To be a spectacle, a mortal trophy for a Roman politician, would be the ultimate negation of everything she had built, of the divine identity she had so meticulously crafted. When Octavian's men finally breached the mausoleum, they found her not in despair, but in full regal attire. She was still the queen. The meeting between them is one of history's great what-ifs. Here was the clash of two worlds. Octavian, the cold, calculating architect of the new Roman order, a man who saw the world in terms of power, logistics, and political advantage. And Cleopatra, the heir to the pharaohs, a woman who wielded mythology as a weapon and saw power as a divine performance. She tried to reason with him, to negotiate for her children's lives, perhaps even using a flicker of the charm that had captivated his own adoptive father. But Octavian was immune. He wasn't Caesar. He saw not a goddess but a political problem to be managed. He saw a treasure to be seized and an enemy to be displayed. He left her under guard, confident that his prize was secure. But he had fundamentally misunderstood his opponent. He thought he was dealing with a defeated monarch, when in fact he was dealing with the living incarnation of a goddess who was about to perform her final, most powerful ritual. Cleopatra knew there was no escape. She knew Octavian would never let her children rule. She knew her world was gone. All that was left was to control the narrative of her own ending. She would not be a footnote in Octavian's story. She would be the author of her own immortal legend. She bathed, dressed in her finest robes, and ordered a final lavish feast to be brought to her. It was the last supper of a goddess on earth. And hidden within that feast, perhaps in a basket of figs, was the instrument of her ascension. ASP. In ancient Egypt, the cobra, or ASP, was not a symbol of evil or deceit. It was a sacred creature, the symbol of divine royalty and protection. It was the uraeus on the pharaoh's crown, the embodiment of the goddess Wadjet, who spat fire at the enemies of the king. The bite of the ASP was said to grant immortality, to transform the victim into a god. For Cleopatra, this was not suicide. This was apotheosis. It was a carefully chosen, deeply symbolic act. A Roman sword was for soldiers like Antony. Poison was for common criminals. But the sacred bite of the ASP was a death fit for a pharaoh. It was a final, defiant act of Egyptian identity, a rejection of Roman conquest. She was choosing an Egyptian death, administered by an Egyptian deity, to secure an Egyptian afterlife. When Octavian's guards burst into the chamber, they found a scene of silent, majestic tragedy. Cleopatra lay on her golden couch, dressed as Isis, serene and beautiful in death. One of her handmaidens lay at her feet, and another Iris was adjusting the crown on her queen's head before collapsing herself. A Roman soldier, shocked, reportedly cried out, "Was this well done?" And the dying handmaiden, with her last breath, replied, "It was very well done, and as befitting the descendant of so many kings." Octavian was furious. He had been cheated of his greatest prize. He could parade her effigy, her treasures, and even her surviving children through Rome, but he could not parade her. By choosing the manner and moment of her own death, Cleopatra had seized control of her story for all time. She had performed her final and most successful act of mythological branding. She ensured that she would not be remembered as Octavian's captive, but as the serpent of the Nile, the last queen of Egypt, a figure of eternal mystery, power, and allure. In the end, who really won? Octavian went on to become Augustus, the first and perhaps greatest Roman emperor. He ruled for 40 years, ushering in an era of peace and stability, the Pax Romana. He was, by any rational measure, one of the most successful leaders in human history. And yet, who captures our imagination? The efficient administrator, or the queen who died for a myth? Who is the subject of plays, poems, and epic films? It is not Augustus. It is Cleopatra. Her strategy of weaving herself into the fabric of mythology ultimately worked, just not in the way she intended. It did not save her kingdom from Rome, but it saved her from obscurity. It granted her a form of immortality more potent than any empire. The Roman Empire is long gone. Its temples are ruins and its legions are dust. But the story of Cleopatra, the woman who dared to call herself a goddess and who died like one, is more alive today than ever. She understood a fundamental truth about humanity, that empires rise and fall, armies turn to dust, but a powerful story, a powerful myth is eternal. She did not just use mythology to rule. In her final defiant act, she became mythology itself. And in doing so, she secured a reign not over a kingdom of sand and river, but over the endless empire of human imagination.